I didn't grow up in a farm. I was not like catching insects when I was small. I grew up in a big city, São Paulo. The two insects I saw were roaches and grain weevils.
One of the largest cities in the world, yeah. Right.
uh, and so like I was interested in insects, but as much as I was interested in anything else, like I don't recall as a child like being specifically interested in insects. And I'm at college, and what actually hooked me up was a class on evolution, on phylogenetics specifically, on like how we can use traits and DNA to infer where species came from. And after I took that class, I asked the professor that taught the class, "Oh, how do you do research on this?" And then he was like, "Yeah, no, you don't do research on phylogenetics in general. Usually, you choose, a taxonomic group you're interested in." And then I was like, "Okay, so what are you interested in?" Like I was like, "Oh, we do research on beetles in my lab." I was like, "Oh, can I join your lab and learn how to do this?" And that's how it started. And like the first few months that I was there, I was just studying the collection. There was a small collection.
So my guest today is Dr. Bruno de Medeiros, Assistant Curator of Insects at the Field Museum of Natural History.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining me, Bruno.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah.
So let's start, we'll get right into it. Weevils.
Yes.
For those people who may not know what a weevil is, maybe we start with, what is a weevil?
Yeah. So a weevil is a kind of beetle that has a long nose, like a structure we call rostrum. It's not actually the nose; it's like their face are super long. People might know weevils that are, say, the grain weevils, so things that can grow in your pantry, like eating rice or noodles. People might know the acorn weevils, the ones that are, they eat acorns. But the weevils they study are mostly weevils that pollinate plants, which a lot of people might not know about. That beetles and weevils, particularly, can be pollinators. But yeah, that's like the short, say, definition is those beetles that have a long nose, and there are more than 60,000 species of them, so more than all vertebrates together. So yeah, that's a lot of weevils out there.
Yeah, so I was looking, there's over 1 million described species of insects, right?
Yes.
But I was also reading that they project that there could be up to 5 million insects.
Yes, or more. We don't know.
Yeah. So another 4 million have yet to be even described.
Yes. So there are several levels of unknowns. So well, first, there are so many species of insects that we don't even know. There's like no world catalog of all species that haven't been described. Like like we have a plant or the bird. You can go online to a catalog. You can get a list of everything that someone put a name on. In insects, that broadly, like for parts of insects, the list exists, but insects broadly, we don't even have that list. So we don't even know what we know as scientists. And then there is the other aspect of unknown, which are the things that no scientist has put a name on yet. There are many estimates of one of the estimates is the 5 million. I think that one comes from looking at the patterns of how many species are described through time. There's someone who, I think they were theory-oriented, that's like, I think it was 80s or 90s, that did like fogging in, so basically insecticide spraying whole trees in the Amazon, and then counting.
Terry Irwin was one
yes.
of her, yeah.
Counting how many of the species that fell down are known and how many are unknown. I think he estimated like 30 million species. So it's something along the range. So like we are either somewhere in between 5 to 20% done in describing insects. Yeah.
And how many new species to science of weevils have you discovered?
Oh, that I discovered. I don't have the count on top of my head. I'm not like So I described, I don't know, a few dozen species, maybe like, I don't know, 15, 20, something like this. I discovered a lot more than I described, because one thing, so there are many parts of the process, right? One thing is to know what you have is a new species, which is already a lot of work, because then you have to compare it to everything that is known already. And the second part is to formally name those species, which entails comparisons and then like it's more than putting a name, right? You need to prove those are not any of the things that have been described so far. Often that includes comparing to specimens that are like 100-year-old or more in a biological collection. Not always the collection I have access to, so you have to travel and so on. So I have described a handful of species. I have discovered a few hundreds of them, and they're in the pipeline. Like we keep describing them as we go, but there's a delay between knowing they're new and actually naming them in a publication. Yeah.
You need a full-time taxonomist almost, yeah?
Yeah, because that's true. I'm not like I do taxonomy, but that's one of the areas of research that we do in the lab. And so like sometimes you can get insights about evolution without naming all the species involved. Naming things is always good, because then that's how you can accumulate information, right? So like only when I name a species, that's when someone else that's going to do a pollination study somewhere else will know that we are talking about the same thing. So that's one of the reasons why it's important. But yes, we do have a backlog of new species to describe that will happen. We're working on methods to streamline this, like of trying to get technology to help us to do it faster.
Yeah. Now, weevils are sometimes considered pests because of their impact on crops.
Yeah.
Is that an accurate portrayal of weevils, or?
I think that's an accurate portrayal of how most people think of weevils. And even taxonomists who work on weevils, a lot of the folks, they focus on the species that are either pests or related to the pest that could become pests, right? And a lot of the literature on weevils focuses on this, what we call antagonistic aspect of the interaction with plants, right? On how weevils harm plants. So almost all weevils, with a few exceptions, like a good part of the weevils are plant feeders. So they will lay their eggs, and their larvae will feed on some part of plants, but not always that actually has a negative impact on the plant. So all those pollinators that I study, they also do that. But the parts they're eating from the plants may or may not be that harmful for plants. And their behaviors as adults, for example, transferring pollen from plant to plant, end up being actually very beneficial. So they do eat plants, but whether or not they are harmful, like that they will become pests, that depends on the context of each interaction. And that's a lot of what my research is about.
So those would be like mutualistic relationships then? Yes.
So like the relationships can go all the way from antagonistic to mutualistic. And very often they're neither. They're like commensalistic. They're, one species depends on the other, but it doesn't really have a huge impact on their host. Yeah.
How many weevil species have been identified thus far, worldwide?
Yeah. So so the term weevil, if we apply this to what formerly called a superfamily Curculionoidea, which includes all of those beetles with the long nose, there is a little less than 60,000 species. There is the main family of weevils, like of those within that group. There are, I think currently, should have on top of my head, I think 6 or 7 families. Maybe 8 now with Symbiotids, but anyway, like less than 10 families of weevils, and one of them comprises 50,000 of those 60,000. So there is one main radiation of weevils, but that's about it, like around 60,000 described species. Yeah.
And do we suspect that that number is?
Yeah. So today was just looking at my students' talk at a conference here, and in that study, what we did is we sampled weevils from flowers of palm trees that are related to the coconut, but are native to South America, and then in each of those, and we sampled 60 species of palms. In each one of those, we looked at all of the weevils that were in the flowers, and then we sorted them by morphology. So we sorted, okay, so looking at how they look like, we think there's 5 or 6 species here. And then across plants, so that's for one plant species in one place. But across plants, you do have weevils that look the same in 2 different plants. And our question is, are they the same species or not? And then we use the genetics to look at their DNA and compare the DNA. And the main result she found is that almost every single weevil that we got, even if they looked the same, if they were in different plants, their DNA shows they're not the same species. So that shows us, because like in some of those cases, if I were to use only morphology, only what they looked like, there would be, like, for example, one species that is associated with 10 palm species, but genetics tells us those are actually 10 species.
Yeah.
So that alone already tells us how much we are underestimating the diversity, and that's on top of the morphological diversity that we know already. So it's severely underestimated. I don't even think we can make a good estimate of how many weevil species remain to be described.
Now, is it common to find multiple weevil species in one palm tree?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it depends on the palm tree biology. So some plants are highly specialized and they only have a few pollinators that interact with them. Others, which is the case of those, they are more generalistic. Not only weevils, other things visit them, flies, bees, and then you have like a whole community with multiple species. But it varies, but it's fairly common, yeah.
And do we know why weevils have that, the rostrum?
That's a very good question. And those whys in biology, there could be multiple whys, right? So we can talk about the why of function, like why this is used, how this is used by weevils now. Not all weevils have a long nose. There are groups of weevils that actually don't. We call them broad-nosed weevils. So people who plant strawberries, for example, might have come across some of those. And that tells us a little bit. So those broad-nosed weevils, one thing they do differently from the ones with the long nose, so that a lot of those long-nosed weevils, their females use their rostrums, or their nose. So again, it's not a nose, it's like the whole face that's extended. So the little teeth are at the tip of the rostrum. And then they use those little teeth to chew on plant tissues and make a hole. And then they turn around and then they lay an egg. So usually the ovipositor is as long as the beak. And they lay an egg inside, and then they plug it with substances produced by the female reproductive system, and then or sometimes with poop. And then what happens is the larva, or the egg, is within the plant tissue, so the larva doesn't need to look for their food. So they are surrounded by their plant food. And also, they are more protected from predators and parasites because they are like inside the plant tissues. So there is, because the historical focus on weevils as plant antagonists, I think that also translated to functional studies in which people focus a lot on this function of the rostrum, the beak, the oviposition function, which is the function that's related to their antagonism with plants. However, in in the broad-nosed weevils, generally, they don't do that. They just lay their eggs in the soil or on top of leaves, and then they fold the leaves and do something like this. However, well, first, there are more uses for rostrum. So a lot of males used to fight. So there's the jousting weevils. If people Google jousting weevil, you're going to see weevils. They use their beaks to fight.
Like horned beetles. And,
Yeah. Same thing as the horned beetle. So they're effectively the rostrum are their horns. And there's another thing that's interesting, and not a lot of people pay attention to, but if you look at the fossil record, weevils, including the lineages that still exist and are descendant from those fossils, weevils that have a long beak precede weevils that lay eggs within plants. So then we can get to the second why. So one why is how they use it, right? The other is why did they evolve this in the first place? And that why is different because they evolved the long beak before they used it for laying eggs on plants. We don't know why this happened. I can get some clues from comparing to other species. A lot of the beetles with long faces are associated with flowers, for example. They use their long faces to reach pollen and eat them. So it could be something along those lines. Those ancient weevils seem to be associated with cones of pines and their relatives, so gymnosperms. And it could be something associated with pollen feeding. But we don't actually know. What I know for sure is this structure did not originate for its main function that exists now, which is to lay eggs within plants. It originated millions of years before they started doing this, and therefore it must have been some other. It must have another cause.
Is anyone looking at the rostrum size in relation to hierarchies or winning fights amongst males?
Yeah. So there are people. It's a colleague of mine who works at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, for example, Umat Sonji. He studies those jousting weevils, and his research, among other things, like his whole research is about sexual selection and how animals find mates or fight. And one of the things he studies is how much those elongated structures in weevils and other insects are real weapons and how much they are just signals between opponents. And but yes, so there are people who study that. I have an interest right now on a different group of weevils that we wrote a grant for this. Hopefully it gets funded. But that they, in addition to the elongated rostrum, they have like two horns that come out from the what we call prosternum, so their breast basically, and they kind of look like mini elephants, kind of like with tusks, and they seem to use those tusks in fights as well. So everything working well, we're gonna have some research in the future on how tusks evolve, and a good thing about studying this in weevils is there are like 4,000 species described in that group of weevils that have tusks. So a lot more than elephants. So we can do comparative biology. We can understand when some tusk morphology evolves and when or not, and so on. So.
And are all those weevils found in the tropics, the ones with the tusks?
There are a few here in North America. They don't have as long tusks. So they are found in flowers like daisy flowers and milkweeds. They're small, like they're mini elephants. Like, I don't know, like 5 millimeters or so. The ones up here, they don't get super exaggerated tusks. They have small tusks, which is also interesting in itself, because why do they even have tusks if they're that small, right? So The species that have been studied are only tropical and they have long tusks. And so it gets even more complicated. So I'll add another layer. Now, they have tusks and some of them have a hole in the middle. and the tusk of the opponent fits into the hole. And that's how they can get close to each other and they can lift the opponent.
Interesting.
Which is, at first, seems contradictory because it seems they have something that helps their opponent to get leverage. In that species that had been studied, the conclusion was that if you're a larger male with a larger tusk, having that hole will allow your opponent to get close enough, but you still have the advantage. But there's all sorts of variation in the shape of the tusks, whether the hole exists or not, whether the hole inside bifurcates or not. And we don't know how this variation relates to behavior. And the ones here in North America, they exist. They have short tusks, and for the most part, I think none of them have the hole. But they do exist. And part of what we want is to study how those transition, like are the ones here related to the ones in the tropics, and how those tusk morphologies change. Yeah.
But it's all the tusk usage is for male-male combat then.
As far as we know.
As far as we know.
Yeah. That could be other things, but we don't know.
Yeah.
It's usually males. I don't think I know any example of weevil with a tusk in which the females have long tusks. For the rostrum, females can have longer beaks than the males. Usually, if they're longer in females, they're also more slender in females. It's pretty clearly used more in the function of opening a hole. When beaks are long in males, they're usually also somewhat broad. They have spines, they have like bristles and stuff. So it's more like a weapon than a tool, or either a weapon or a signal. But yes, I can't think of an example in which those tusks are existing in females. So they seem to be something associated with males only. Yeah.
And what would you say is the weirdest weevil plant interaction that you've witnessed?
That I witnessed. Oh, okay. Give me a second.
Or maybe not have witnessed, maybe that you're aware of, I should say.
Yeah. There are a few that are weird. So there's one case, and that's not really that well known, but there is one kind of weevil with very, very slender and long rostrum that it seems that there is one observation saying that they do lay eggs in plants, but they actually lay eggs within grasshopper eggs within plants, and that's what their larvae are feeding on, the grasshopper eggs. But that's not like someone needs to verify that. That's a kind of an old natural history piece of information, and those weevils are kind of rare, so it's not easy to observe this. But maybe I can there's something, maybe it's not that weird for me right now because I'm more familiar with that, but I think it would be pretty weird for a lot of people. Some of those pollinators that I study, they visit male flowers of palms to eat pollen, and then they visit female flowers to lay their eggs. So, and that's how they end up pollinating. So they end up rubbing against the flower, and then they leave pollen there. But then they also left their egg. And those palms, each flower will produce, like a coconut, like each flower will produce one seed. So if the larva is successful, there will be no seed because it's going to eat that seed. If the larva, but then if the plant killed all larvae, then there will be no pollination because those weevils are the ones that are transferring pollen. So they're in this very interesting kind of interaction in which they have an immediate benefit for pollinating the plant, which is this creates the seed that will be the food of the larva. But at the same time, the larva harms the seed. So it's a very so that kind of pollination is called pollinator is called a pollinating seed predator. There are other insects that do this, like here in North America, especially in deserts, but there's one species here that gets to the east too. There's this plant yucca, and there's a moth that does the same thing to yucca. So the yucca moth visits the flowers and lay eggs on the flowers, and there is interplay. And I think not a lot of people think about this kind of pollinator that ends up. It's not the most common kind of pollinator, but it ends up being very important for the plants they interact with.
Just to take a little sidetrack here, I have to ask, when you were at Harvard, did you have the opportunity to meet or interact with E.O. Wilson?
Oh, yeah, I did. Yeah, a little bit. He would come a few days a week, and like he had a very active lab while I was there. Like there was always people visiting and working in the collection, and so like he had lunch sometimes with the grad students. So he invited me and a few grad students for lunch once. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and I saw some. He showed up also in some. So a professor taught biogeography, and then like he invited E.O. Wilson to give one lecture on, because E.O. Wilson had some early papers on island biogeography. So about the diversity of species on islands. Those lectures ended up being more like Q&A session about life and things than anything else. but those are pretty cool.
Yeah. Could you walk us through an example of a co-evolutionary example of a plant and insect, or a weevil and
co-evolutionary? So coevolution can mean, people mean a few different things, but coevolution, one of them is about adaptation. So like when you have two species that end up interacting very closely to each other, and over time, their traits end up, if it's a mutualistic interaction, the traits end up matching in a way that, so like one famous example is the orchid with a super long nectar spur that Darwin observed, and then like presumed there would be a moth with a super long tongue that would pollinate that orchid, and sure enough it existed. So this is an example of coevolution in which the moth and the flower evolve morphologies that fit each other because of the mutualistic nature of the interaction. The other aspect that people sometimes emphasize in coevolution is just the phylogenetic pattern. So like when you study the evolutionary tree of, say, a plant and the associated insect to that plant, sometimes they match because then they have such a close association that whenever one species speciates into two, the other one also does it. Famous example of this is, say, lice in birds. With plant-feeding insects, I think there was an early idea that was very common. Nowadays, and I think that's pretty much across the board in the field, I don't think that we have a lot of very good examples of this strict one-to-one match. Like in a few cases, it occurs a little more. Say like so figs are pollinated by tiny wasps that, just like those weevils, they get into the fig, and then so a fig is a flower. By the time we eat it, it's actually like a collection of fruits. But a fig is a flower but it's a flower that instead of being open, it's closed, and then there is a little hole. And then little wasps that can feel the scent of their specific fig will be able to get in there and lay eggs and pollinate. And then by the time you eat the fig, the offspring of those wasps are gone, except for the males because they stay behind. But by that time, you can't even tell them apart. But anyway, that's one example where usually figs and wasps are pretty specialized. So each wasp only goes to one fig, and each fig only has one or a handful of wasps. But then when people do their phylogenetic histories, there is some match, but the more we're sequencing and the more studies people do, we start finding the mismatches, the places where you don't find exactly the same shape in the trees. And that shows us that sometime in the past, even though nowadays we see this very strict association, some wasp must have gone to the wrong fig, and then it did well. Like it was able to reproduce and start. And that's, we haven't done this kind of analysis for the palm weevils yet, formally, but I think that's pretty much the case for the weevils. They don't have that very strict association. It seems strict when you look at the snapshot that we have now. So like, oh, this weevil only goes to that plant, and that plant only has a handful of weevils. But when you look at the deep time, it seems that sometimes the weevils switch the plants they're associated with, and so like the coevolution in that phylogenetic sense is not as strict. We haven't studied in my in the system that I studied. We haven't studied a lot of coevolution in that trait matching sense yet. There are some things we want to do soon with the scents that the plants emit and volatiles. But in other groups, like the wasps, the fig wasps, or the moss pollinating flowers, that's a lot more obvious, and there's a lot more research.
Mm-hmm. What first drew you to study insects, and specifically weevils?
Yeah, so in Brazil, you decide on your major at the university before applying. So you apply to a specific course of study. And I had many interests. I actually went to a high school that, so I don't think the exact kind of high school, there's a one-to-one mapping to the school system in the US, but it was kind of a vocational high school. So I did I was on the path to kind of more like be an engineer. So I did electronics in the high school, like would build circuits and whatnot. And I don't know, at the time of applying to college, I'm not sure, I don't remember why I ultimately decided I want biology. Maybe it was around the time when they were cloning sheep, and then I got that. That made biology compelling, and I got to biology. But I was broadly interested. So I have a very different origin story from most entomologists. I didn't grow up in a farm. I was not like catching insects when I was small. I grew up in a big city, São Paulo. The two insects I saw were roaches and grain weevils.
One of the largest cities in the world, yeah. Right.
And so like I was interested in insects, but as much as I was interested in anything else, like I don't recall as a child like being specifically interested in insects. And I'm at college. And what actually hooked me up was a class on evolution, on phylogenetics specifically, on how we can use traits and DNA to infer where species came from. And after I took that class, I asked the professor that taught the class, "Oh, how do you do research on this?" And then he was like, "Yeah, no, you don't do research on phylogenetics in general. Usually you choose a taxonomic group you're interested in." And then I was like, okay, so what are you interested in? Like, I was like, oh, we do research on beetles in my lab. It's like, oh, can I join your lab and learn how to do this? And that's how it started. And like the first few months that I was there, I was just studying the collection. There was a small collection. So my supervisor Dan, there was a museum of zoology at the University of São Paulo, but that's not on campus. That's off campus. At first, I was only working with like the teaching collection on campus, and I got hooked. Like when I saw those things under the scope, I had no idea, because when I tell you, and a lot of people seeing this, they're probably gonna be like, "Oh, this guy's saying there are like 60,000 kinds of weevils. They're probably all brown and small, like, and look the same." To a certain extent, that's true. There's lots of weevils that are brown and small and look the same. But when you look at them under the scope, like you see this whole variation. Like they are as variable as a lion is from an elephant. And then when I started seeing all that diversity, that's what hooked me up with insects. I keep a general interest in evolutionary biology with using all that I know by now on insects as kind of the primary way through which I get to general questions. But it was basically this: in college, seeing a whole diversity for the first time with the proper tools that led me to see how cool that was.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of weevils as pollinators?
Yeah. So I'll start from for your previous question. So how I got interested in insects, right? And then so I was working in this lab doing research on a lab that did a lot of weevil taxonomy and phylogenetics. So my professor was interested in describing species and how they are related. Eventually, as I was nearing the end of my undergrad, during my undergrad, I actually ended up diverging and doing a lot of research on light pollution and its effect on insects. That was my thesis. But at the end, I was like, okay, so I joined this lab to study diversity. I ended up working on light pollution. I still wanted to do the diversity study. And I told him, okay, I want to do a master's here before I move on to to a PhD, and I want the master's to be on taxonomy and phylogenetics. And then he told me, okay, so let's pick a group that you can do within the time frame of a master's program. And then there was this group of little colored weevils, like a lot of them are kind of yellow with black stripes and things like this. And it's like, this is probably easy because they have all those color patterns, and so it's easy to tell species apart. And then you can do what we call taxonomic revision. So look at everything that we know about the species diversity in this group and kind of summarize and describe the new species that need to be described, or synonymize species, tell, these are ones that are the same or not. Long story short, at the end of that work, all of those easily distinguishable colored species with color patterns, I ended up lumping them into the same species. So a lot of those things are actually variable species. They're all the same, but they look different. And I found a lot of species that look the same but are different. So things that are really hard to distinguish by eye. Yeah. But they are doing different things, and they're in different plants, and they have structures that show they're different species. So that was the result of my thesis. But in the process, I did some field work to go collect those species. And all I knew is they were associated with palm flowers. And by the time I was doing that study, no one, or with one exception of one paper in German, that I would only find out about it years later, very few people cared about what they were doing in the flowers. And then in the course of field work, I started to realize, those species, some of those species I only find in male flowers. Some species, I didn't even know that those palms, you could distinguish their floral phases. It was really during the field work in the process of collecting beetles that I started to make the natural history observations that would define the course of my career. So here I'm the curator of pollinating insects. And I didn't start, just like I didn't start studying insects because of insects, it goes more, kind of more because of biology in general. I didn't start studying pollination because I was particularly interested in pollination. I was interested in those beetles, and then I realized that there was a whole lot of things about their biology that especially the taxonomists who had worked on those beetles up to that point did not pay a lot of attention. And anyway, but there's this, move forward now, 2 decades later almost. So weevils are, as pollinators, they are pretty important for a few groups of plants. So for palms, so palm trees, many groups of palm trees are pollinated primarily by weevils. Some groups of arums are. Some groups of plants in the Annonaceae, so like that would be soursop family. So soursop in general, they are that family. A lot of species are pollinated by beetles, not only weevils, but there are groups that are pollinated by weevils. So it seems that weevils are pretty important pollinators of selected groups of plants. And there's other things like the plant where the Panama hat comes from. It's a family Cyclanthaceae. They are almost universally pollinated by weevils. And they are also very common flower visitors of generalist plants, so plants that attract a lot of different insects. And in that case, there won't be any particular species of weevil that by itself is highly relevant, but as a group, they are one of the pollinators, together with flies, bees, and other things. I recently did a study. It'll probably be online. By the time this is online, it might be online already, on beetle pollination in general, not only weevil, across the globe. And beetles on flowers. So if you look at published studies in which someone went somewhere and looked at a flower and described what are the species of insects that visit the flower, about 20% of those find beetles in those flowers. But then in some environments, like in the Amazon, it gets to closer to 50% of the plants that have been looked at. So beetles in general seem to be more important in some parts of the world, mostly in the tropics, but not only, like Mediterranean environments also. And then in those places, there are those two kinds of plants, the ones that are highly dependent on beetles, in some cases those beetles are weevils, and the ones that are more generalist. And then weevils turn out to be the second most common kind of beetle on flowers of those generalist plants. And that not even, because the study is not published yet, not even beetle biologists know this. You're the first to be hearing that. Scarab beetles are the first most common, and the second are weevils. So they are pretty common. They're just overlooked as visitors of flowers, not always their primary pollinator, and that's what we study. Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest misconception that the general public has of insects?
Well, the biggest. Oh, there are many. I don't know. I think so. Let's say if we generalize insects, right, at large, I think the biggest is that they are ugly and interesting and harmful, right? So there are way too many people that, if you'd ask, what's the kind of animal that could disappear from Earth, they would probably say bugs. When in reality, we only exist because of them, right? So if we're not for ants and and termites, nutrients wouldn't get recycled. If it were not for wood-boring beetles and other things, wood would not be eaten. Like, at the end of the day, it's fungi and bacteria that are going to break them down. But they only do that after you get there is actually research showing this. Like, if there are no insects making holes in the wood and breaking it apart, those microbes, they can't get in there. And so, like, if we're not for those things, forests would die, because then when a tree dies, it just stays there and it's not broken up. Pollination, right? So, like, when we talk about pollination, at least nowadays, a lot of people think of bees. I think most people think of honeybees, which are an important agricultural species, and not necessarily the most important species for pollination of native plants worldwide. But some people go a little beyond. They think of bees in general, like the many thousands of species of bees. But if we go even broader, like about 20% of the beetles are visiting flowers. Almost all butterflies and moths are. They're flies, like a lot of the carrion flies that people don't like. I was reading once an article of how in some mango plantations, people put like rotting meat or stuff like this to breed carrion flies so they can pollinate the mangoes. So I think like this all shows that or that insects all look the same, right? That is a misconception that I had until I could look them up close. So I think in general, the general public doesn't fully have the information like that insects for the most part are not harmful or pests. Those are just the small subset that we get to interact with precisely because they're pests. Most of the others, they're just living their lives, and we never hear about them exactly because they don't bother us. So I think that would be, I think, the most general misconception about insects.
Mm-hmm. What books have changed your life the most?
Whoa, what books? Oh God, I should have a changed my life.
Or impacted your life, let's
Yeah.
say. Changed is pretty heavy, right?
Yeah, no, it is. Let me see. There are a few. Like there is a book that I find pretty good, if not sad. It's called Butterfly People. That it tells the story of actually, like if you look at this collection, if I would open that cabinet, most of those specimens. So this is the butterfly and moth part of the collection, and a lot of the specimens here that we have here belonged to a 19th century collector named Hermann Strecker. And he's one of the many that in the 19th century started to do butterfly collecting in the US. So like, we think nowadays as the US is this powerhouse of science and leading everything. That was not always the case, right? At some point, but particularly in taxonomy, Europe led the way. And that's around the time when a lot of Americans started getting interest in natural history. And the book tells the story of how the reason why this happened is to a large extent because of transportation, because of railroads that were going throughout the country. And the very same railroads that got people closer to that allowed people to get to places that faster, and then like people with an interest in natural history, for example, to get to new places, are the railroads that caused the environmental change that eventually caused the demise of a lot of those species. And I think that's one book that I really liked to read because, well, first it puts a context on how this natural history interest emerged in this country that is it's actually a process that was going on and is going on in my in Brazil, for example, where I come from, as we speak. So I got to go to places in the Amazon or in the Cerrado, which is a savanna kind of environment, and find new species and find things that no one had found before, or no scientists had found before, because of the roads that allow me to get there. But those are the very same roads that are destroying those environments. And I think like reading that book was, I really liked to get both the like bigger context of where we are inserted as scientists in this process, and also to think about how the tools that we use, or how our work is not isolated from the society at large, right? So we are part of this river that's moving, and our interests and our the research questions we can address, or the things that we can do, are part of this whole economic system that is also changing the very subjects that we're studying. So I think that's a book that was highly influential in how I think about my science. Yeah.
What are some of your hobbies outside of science?
Yeah, outside of science, well, I have a 19-month-old at home now, so a lot of my free time is spent with her, and I really enjoy being with her. So I would say that nowadays a lot of my hobbies are like just putting her and I have this a friend of mine gave us this carrier that's kind of she sits on her back, and then like walk around with her and showing this nature to her and other things. Other than that, I don't know. I like playing video games. I haven't done in 19 months, pretty much. But watching movies. Maybe someday we'll go back to those. But right now is enjoying spending time with my wife and my daughter. Yeah.
What do you think is the most controversial thing happening in your field right now?
Yeah, I saw you ask that question to other people. I should have prepared for that one. There are a few different ones. I can. So one that's fresh on my mind comes from we had a seminar speaker this week, for example, that came here and showed some of the new research on how to speed up biodiversity studies, for example. So we're going, and I'm part of the trend. I'm also doing that kind of thing of going all in for let's apply technology, because we have all those millions of species to describe, and like I told you, I haven't been able to describe the species that I know exist already, and historically, like all of this effort together of thousands of people over like 3 centuries has really only made a small dent into our knowledge of nature. So we're going all in with sensors, AI, and so on, and even like automating processes of describing species and that kind of thing. I think that's still pretty controversial. There's a lot of pushback. Like a lot of people don't think we should go that way, and that there's a reason why some things have been done the way they were done so far. I'm kind of tracing a middle road. I'm trying to develop methods that allow us to look at historical data and extract them from historical publications, but also interact with this super data-rich field. And I'm not yet completely sold on the full automation. I think there's a human aspect to it that is important, because science, just like the book that I mentioned, science is not only generating knowledge, it's a societal process, like it's a human thing to a certain extent. So that's one of the things. I think there's related to this, there's some controversy on what are the most diverse. We don't know, because we don't know so many species. We don't even know what's the most diverse thing on Earth. And then if you talk to someone who specializes primarily on beetles like me, will say, oh, it's beetles. So beetles currently hold the record number of species. But then some other people using other methods, they're going to collect a lot of flies and say, no, there's actually a lot more flies, a lot more wasps out there. So that's on a biodiversity description side of things. I think on evolutionary biology, there is still, we never stop discussing what a species is, and because we never stop discussing what they are, we also never stop discussing how they arise, and what are the main processes generating species. And there's a lot of controversy on the roles of different processes, especially genomic processes, on how species are generated. So I think those are two that come to mind, and very related to some of the research that we have in the lab right now.
How has your work studying entomology impacted your humanity?
So how my work studying entomology impacted my humanity? Well, I think, so going back to people's misconceptions, I think one of the benefits of so many people overlooking how important insects are that it gives us some perspective, because scientists, we can get pretty, we're very focused on what we're doing, and then we can get into pretty intense discussions about things that at the end of the day matter very little for many people, right? So I think because we have such an open field to study, so many things to be discovered, and there are many fights out there, right? Scientific fights on particular things, and I generally have the stance that I think some of them are worth picking, but 99% of them are not. And one way to know it is trying to explain to my grandmother what I'm fighting about with someone else. And if I can't do it, it probably means it's not worth fighting. And so I think as a scientist and as a supervisor of PhD students, one thing that I intentionally try to do is to have a research group that we are doing cutting edge research for sure, and we are going for excellence and trying to make the most of the trust and resources that society gives us to do something we love. But I try to do that in a way that's mostly positive and in interactions with others, both other scientists, my students, and society at large. So studying questions that a lot of people can find interesting, or at least when people don't find interesting because they don't know something, intentionally try to spread this knowledge so more people will find it interesting, and also be generally focusing more on the things that made me start science, which is the curiosity, than the prestige, for example, which is what a lot of scientists ultimately go for. So I think studying things that a lot of people don't care that much about, I think gives us this opportunity to actually think deeply about what we're doing and trying to explain better and spread the word more than we would in other fields, and realize that this is mostly a collaborative effort, and there is no reason for me not to do it in a positive way. So I think that may be how I influenced my humanity. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'll just ask you one more. Do you want to answer this last one in Portuguese for?
I can try. Let's see.
What advice would you have for young scientists coming
Okay.
up in the?
Yeah, I'll say it in English, and then like YouTube can put the subtitles. The more people understand English than Portuguese. What advice I have for young scientists? So I think that's a really interesting moment to be a young scientist, because probably more than when I was just starting, because we are at the brink of this revolution that will change everything, right? So like I think with artificial intelligence, for the first time, we have automation of tasks that we thought were inherently human, and like no one else could do it. And that's probably not true for AI will be able to do a lot of the things that scientists do nowadays. I think especially one kind of science is going to be, which is the most common kind of science, say in nature science kind of papers nowadays, is going to completely disappear in a few years, which is the big data science. So like the thing of, I have a question that may or may not be that interesting, but then I find a method to get a lot of data, and then I find a pattern that, however faint, it's significant because I have a lot of data. And I have some papers like this. Some of my most highly cited papers are this kind of paper. I think this will be automated very soon. Like I think that's the kind of study that a question that exists already, and we just need a lot of data. I think that's the kind of thing the machines will be doing from now on. But the questions that are more creative and they're more the kind of like asking a question that no one has asked before, this is what I think ChatGPT won't be able to do for a long time. And so I would be, my advice for people starting in their fields would be to either master the tools that will be used for this big data kind of science, and so like and do it as efficiently as possible, but for the most part focus on interesting creative questions, because that's the thing that we humans are gonna still be using, and in this process doing it interacting with other people, because that's also a lot of if we have machines that are able to think and are able to do things like intellectual work, the people-to-people interaction will still be something very important going into the future. So that would be my advice.
Obrigado, Bruno.
Obrigado você por me receber.
Appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you so much.